Might take the whole semester for me to report what happened here. The wonderful discussion of metaphor and the use of metaphor to understand this, and also to provoke, but also to provoke and maybe ameliorate the problems of which we're dealing with. And just that could take a whole semester of the bases of why would somebody want to kill somebody they do not know, and the fascinating ideas about oppression, reactions to oppression, opportunity, and lack of alternatives. And we talked about democracy, of giving the possibility of alternatives, and lack of democracy, meaning that if you really can't take it anymore, you might turn to violence. Then we had Secretary Curtis Renaud, who showed us that, okay, once you have violence, how are we going to try to deal with this? The idea of can we get those arms away from the people, and so we can get them talking again. So that was a very nice contrast of, from the one hand, how do we get to violence, and the other hand, you got the violence, how are you going to get the arms away from the people, and what are you going to do about that? And then we had Peter Coleman come in, and this fantastic idea that we get some basic training. Okay, it continues with what we were talking about with getting the arms away. We want to mediate. How do we mediate? We have some standard ideas of mediation, but have we really subjected to the best of social science? And so he began to study this in terms of careful social science, and said, we have some general ideas of mediation, but we can actually find out that when you have different mediations issues, different mediations circumstances, mediators often change their mediation habits or their mediation responses. And he showed us how that happened and how we're studying to make that systematic so we would understand different mediation session, how do we deal with it? And that was absolutely fascinating. Ambassador Amit Chabara, who talked about if you want to do this, you have to connect with people on the ground. And he talked about how do we connect with people on the ground, understand the people on the ground, and work with the people on the ground. So that was a very useful follow-up. Everything seemed to work with everything else. Priscilla Prutzman then began to talk about, well, in your own personal lives, how are you going to deal with this? And we talked about how do you react to statements of bias. How do you work with people who are saying things which might be inflammatory or hurtful? And I think I got the idea of verbal judo, that you don't necessarily knock the person down, but you work with the person to lead them on to something a little more humane. Our last group talked about, this was the idea, we were basically up to now talking about violence between different types of groups. But our last, we had Michael Royster talking about, hey, wait a minute, a lot of the anger, some of the violence, a lot of the prejudice is within the groups, within the Christians, within the Muslims, within the Jewish people, which I, of course, experienced very much when I got involved with the Iranian Accord dispute. One person from the other political party came up to me and said, our relationship is over. Thank God just now I met Michael Lincoln here, who's also from the other political party, who said, okay, I'll replace that person. So, but within the groups, how do we deal within the groups, which might be, I don't want to take too much time, but sometimes the intensity of the anger within the group is greater than the anger between the groups. And my own feeling is that within almost every group we can get, religious, political, tribal, ethnic, we often have the moderates, the humane parts, and then we also have the people who are saying no, the hardliners. And one of the great things is, can we do something about the division within these groups to soften people in terms of their feelings about one another, and then the outgroup. And then we had the 3 Ds, maybe it all fits together. The 3 Ds, how are we going to finally get everything working? Well, diplomacy, development, and defense. If we have a coordinated program, diplomacy, working with people, development, building the resources so we can work with people, defense, so we can give people security. One of the problems in Iraq has been, and it's not just Iraq, where, hey, let's all have a nice Iraqi nation with one Iraqi government running everything, and then the people in the villages say, I can't trust them to defend me. I cannot put my rifle down. So how can you do that? How can you give people that security? We can leave it, because ultimately, metaphor is very important, but ultimately human beings are not metaphors, so the metaphors have to serve the human beings. Okay?